Good morning, everyone who's in Asia, and good evening for those of you like me who are in North America. And thanks for joining us today. My name is Thomas Abel. I'm with the Asian Development Bank, where I serve as the Director of Digital Technology for Development. And I'm happy to moderate this webinar and welcome you, including the experts, who are going to help us with this important discussion about challenges in cross-border data flows. So just, in terms of a little bit of context, the agreements that have focused on digital trade reflect a global economy that is increasingly digital, powered by data, and there are many opportunities lying ahead, not just for the large tech giants and consumers, but also for small businesses that may even be offline today. But we know that these solutions require some level of international data flows, or at least consistent approaches to that across the Asia and Pacific region. And how do we deal with these opportunities and challenges posed by cross-border data flows? What are the roles of major trade agreements like CPTPP or others? And how can they reflect the changing dynamics that often move faster than these trade negotiations can move? And we know every business will be impacted. So just as a little bit of background from the Asian Development Bank, ADB is a regional development bank. We are based in Manila, and our Strategy 2030 is basically to support a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. And this increasingly depends on digital solutions and digital technologies. We also have a very strong footprint in regional cooperation and integration, one of our 7 top key operational priorities. We host regional cooperation. We even host regional cooperation programs like the Central Asia Regional Cooperation Zone and the Greater Mekong. So we have a very strong vested interest in improving regional cooperation. And as that moves towards digital, it becomes an increasing part of our work. The unit that I lead is called Digital Technology for Development, which is relatively new because, ADB, as we started in the 60s, was mainly focused on infrastructure, roads and bridges and power plants and that sort of thing. But as we, are heading into the increasingly digital future, more and more of our projects and more of our demands of our developing member governments are focused on digital. And we do a lot of work in the area of policy around digital, starting with just connectivity itself, that we still have almost half of the region who are unconnected to the internet and not able to get access to the now almost essential capabilities that are delivered through the internet. We also support our developing member governments with areas like policy and in digital platforms. We support our developing member governments with support on e-commerce regulations. And we're seeing an increase in this demand from our governments, because they also need to understand what is happening across the region and have trusted partners. And ADB kind of is a unique trusted partner that we have, all the major governments as members, and we have a very open process of deciding what we're doing and implementing programs. So we can play that role, even though I would say we're not a technology organization. We don't develop technologies, but we do provide policy support, advice, and more of our programs that we do fund are actually driven by digital technologies. So that's just a little background on ADB, and we will be able to cover more if folks have questions. Now, the recording of this event will be available next week on the website, so you can sign up to get a link sent to you after the event is over. And we also would encourage folks to use the QA function to raise questions anytime, and don't hesitate to put questions in anytime they think of them, because we're missing one speaker today, so we might have more time for Q&A. So with that, I would like to thank the speakers that we have today. Now, Kendra Schaefer from the Trivium China was planning to be here in the agenda, and she had to last minute conflict and will not be joining us. But we are happy to have Ambassador Kurt Tong and Michaela Browning. So I'll start with introducing Ambassador Tong, former U.S. Consul General of Hong Kong and former ambassador to APEC. Ambassador Tong is an expert in trade agreements and multilateral forums, just the kind of person, especially in Asia, where this is the topic of today, and in some ways the most important for these types of agreements globally. And then we also have Michaela Browning, and Michaela is the Consul General, previously Consul General of Hong Kong also, and she's now Vice President of Public Policy and Government Affairs for Google, covering Asia, the Asia Pacific region. And we had the good fortune of working with her predecessor, Ambassador Ted Osius, who was part of our ADB Digital Technology Advisory Board. And we have a long, deep partnership with Google as one of the key leaders of technology development globally, and happy to have Michaela with us as well. So thanks everybody for joining us, and just don't forget that put your questions in the chat box. And then, so I think we'll start with Ambassador Tong to give us your remarks on this topic, and I guess I'll hand it to you, Ambassador. Go ahead.
Great, thank you, Thomas, and it's great to be with you, and also with my good friend and colleague, Michaela Browning. And I also want to say thanks at the outset to the Hinrich Foundation, which is really doing some excellent and groundbreaking work in trade policy, particularly in digital trade policy, and I very much congratulate them for assembling this discussion, which I think will be quite interesting. Among the three of us, I am probably the least expert with regard to digital policy per se. So what I thought I would do would be to talk a little bit about the question of what's the next steps in regional economic diplomacy with respect to digital trade and the digital economy, and through that touch on this question about cross-border data flows and other questions that are pressing matters as the digital economy grows to become an ever-increasing share of the regional economic activity. That trend is immutable and will continue. And so if we're going to, as a region, be successful in promoting economic growth and all of the other benefits that come from deeper digitalization of economies, we're going to need to make progress on the rules of the road between the nations of the region in how that commerce takes place. That's sort of self-evident statement, but the details of how to get from that general proposition to making actual progress is extraordinarily complicated, particularly given, as everyone knows, the level of diversity in form of governance, in economic development, in regulatory mindset among the economies of the Indo-Pacific. And so getting from A to B is it has proven to be, and is going to continue to be, quite challenging. So looking at it a little with just a certain degree of specificity, starting from the perspective of corporations or private sector actors working in the digital space in organized fashion, they encounter a number of different kinds of impediments to their business. They can come in multiple forms, right? And so it's important to be specific about what one is discussing and what one's trying to put on the agenda for regulatory convergence or for discussion among governments in the region. So there's questions about content restrictions, for example, which are very tightly held prerogatives for many countries, and not an area where there's not been a whole lot of flexibility in reaching agreement between nations, unless they had nations and economies, unless they've got sort of the same mindset about governance in general. There's the whole question about antitrust actions and how that's become an increasingly relevant part of how digital economy is regulated. There's questions about privacy, about cross-border data flows and whether how free those are. There's questions about encryption, about anonymity of participants on the internet or in the internet economy. Questions about surveillance and what should be allowed there and how that impacts business. And then there's questions about taxes and how both at the border and behind the border taxes as they impact the digital economy. So that's a lot, right? So we could sit down here for about 17 hours and try and talk through all that. But instead of doing that, what I'd like to do is compare and perhaps Hinrich Foundation staff, Sandy, could put up the slide that I have. I only have one slide, I promise, that takes a couple of examples of what has been agreed in the international context about digital rules. There are other, this is not comprehensive. There's also the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, the wonderful agreement that the United States decided to shoot itself in the foot by withdrawing from, which has chapters covering digital rules. But just as an example of sort of a couple of rather different approaches, I put these two forward. And so anyone is happy to take a screenshot of this if you want. There's no patent, but don't trust the details because it might not be entirely accurate. But this is, to the best of my understanding, the US-Japan commitments in this regard are quite more extensive, more prescriptive, and more definitive in taking forms of regulation off the table for the digital activity between the US and Japanese economy. They're similar to the CPTPP provisions as I understand them, but perhaps even take it a couple steps further in a few regards. And if you look at this list, I've tried to juxtapose sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 between the provisions of the US-Japan agreement and those in the digital economy partnership agreement, which, as most of the participants on this call probably know, is an effort between Singapore, New Zealand, and I believe Chile that is now being expanded to other economies to try and work from the ground up and address some of these same issues in a different approach. But before getting to that, looking at the US-Japan commitments are quite far-reaching. No tariffs on digital products or or data per se, insurance of non-discriminatory treatment, digital products, ensuring that data can be transferred across borders with no restrictions, no forced disclosures of code, allowing the use of encryption. There's a cybersecurity element to it, and then rather broad-reaching sort of state-of-the-art, quote-unquote state-of-the-art provisions on privacy and consumer protection, access to government data. Each of those is addressed to some extent in the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, but in more voluntary fashion, less binding fashion, and not as comprehensively, and not as definitively. And so in many of the DEPA modules, what the economies are doing is agreeing to codify their existing rules and testify, sort of, Star Trek, I promise that my laws and regulations in my economy are consistent with the principles as outlined in the DEPA, and I've gone through an exercise of proving that to the other DEPA partners. But there is a dispute settlement mechanism. There is some teeth to the agreement, but generally speaking, it is less comprehensive, less absolutist, if you will, in terms of the provisions that are there. And therefore, the hope of the designers of the DEPA is that it will be acceptable to a broad range of Indo-Pacific economies and will attract a lot of participants across the board. So when we take the slide down, thank you very much for that. So then I sit in the United States. The other question to address is one of the elephants in the room. There's lots of elephants in this room. Is what's the United States going to do about this, and will it help the process of coming together with either an expansion of the DEPA or the creation of something new, or an expansion of the US-Japan approach, or the US perhaps magically coming back to CPTPP. Let's put that aside for now. The fact of the matter is that the United States still doesn't really know what it wants in this area, despite having discussed it now rather intensively for over a year in the halls of the U.S. government. And the latest indications that one can observe from the outside are that there's an intention to be active in this space, but not really a clear sense of direction. Just this past week, the Commerce Department and the U.S. Trade Representative have both put forward requests for comments from the private sector, NGOs, and others regarding a set of issues that they intend to bring to a negotiation with a certain set of countries, maybe about a dozen economies from the Indo-Pacific, and that list of issues that they'd like to discuss includes digital-related questions. Not defined with any more specificity than that, just sort of digital economy questions in those announcements. The troubling part of it, though, is that there were two separate announcements by two separate agencies, and they both touch on digital questions. And so it's not clear there's supposed to be 4 baskets, if you will, of negotiation under this framework initiative by the United States, but it's not clear who's in charge of this issue. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is there's no sense of what the objectives are. And there's a good reason for that, which is that they haven't decided what the objectives are for the the U.S. participation in this exercise, because they're being torn in multiple directions about what the purpose is. In a nutshell, the U.S. government, and in particular the Democratic Party, part of the U.S. government, which is currently in charge of the executive branch, understands that expansion of the digital economy and making that economy more seamless, including addressing the question of cross-border data flows, is very much in the U.S. national interest, because the U.S. has some of the strongest, or maybe the strongest set of digital companies anywhere, including major platform companies like Google that Michaela's going to tell us about a little bit, but others as well, in a variety of fields and subfields of the digital economy. And there's great opportunity for non-digital exporters to leverage the digital economy to benefit their activities as well. So there's that pro-business thing that is recognized. And then there's the other side, which is deep political concern about what's going on with relation to questions about privacy, about competition policy, and sort of concern about quote unquote big tech being so good at what it does that it's scary to political type people and a lot of the interest groups that contribute ideas to them. And so we've seen a situation where this is quite political in the United States. So with those competing objectives, they've had trouble coming up with what was an easier debate a few years ago when the US-Japan agreement was reached, when it was a US trade representative listening to business and deciding what the agenda was and negotiating with a friendly partner and reaching agreement in rather rapid fashion. So that's where it kind of lay down. I'm going to stop there, Thomas, and we can get into discussion, but just thought people might be interested in that overall question. And then maybe in the Q&A, we can get into the sort of questions about what might happen next or what should happen next.
Thanks, Ambassador Tong. Yeah, I think that's a great summary, illustrating quickly how all the complex pieces are coming together and not really showing anyone a clear path forward. And I think that's the reason to have these kinds of conversations, and also to look at it from an Asia Pacific view, where many of the countries are on the receiving end of so much that there's more urgency to try to get ahead of things. So we'll go now to Michaela and hear your perspective from Google, and obviously your vast experience before Google. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks, and thank you, Hinrich, for having me. The digital trade economy globally is now worth $6 trillion. $6 trillion. The Southeast Asia internet economy is estimated to be worth $1 trillion by 2030. $1 trillion. This was in a report that Google, Temasek, and Bain have just released in the last year. And in the last year, during the pandemic, 80 million new internet users came online in Southeast Asia alone, 60 million more digital consumers. And I think it's really important to provide some of that really significant context to what we're talking about here, because digital transformation is happening. And we know that digital technology, digital trade was a lifeline for many businesses during last year's pandemic and continuing. 1 in 3 digital merchants in Southeast Asia tell us they would not have survived the pandemic if not for digital platforms. And I think it's worth just putting that up on the slide. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Dinny. Just to demonstrate the scale and significance of what we're talking about here. And we're particularly seized of it in light of the pandemic, because we know that rebounding amidst the pandemic is going to be so significant for people, for communities, for businesses, and for all the countries in the region. So what we're talking about really matters. And I want to talk about 4 things. Firstly, obviously, the scale of the opportunity, and I've just started to outline that, but what that looks like in detail. And the fact that cross-border data flows fundamentally underpin our ability to realise this opportunity and the economic growth that's in prospect there. And as Ambassador Tong has mentioned, we know that at the same time there's growing concern about digital safety, both privacy and cybersecurity at the individual level, at the business level, and at the governance level, at the country and the regional level, the governance structures that guide how we go about realising this digital trade and living in a digital world. And so that's why we're here to talk today about what are the clear rules of the road for realising this opportunity. What are the challenges in terms of governance in order to realise that and do it responsibly and well? And so partly that's a discussion about what governments can do in terms of trade and other agreements to sort of establish the rules of the road. But it's also about companies such as Google. What can we do to demonstrate privacy and security by design, that we're responsible and that we want to work in partnership with policymakers, industry, communities and individuals to ensure that the internet is safer and more secure place for people to realise this opportunity. And one of the challenges I'll come back to is the proliferation of policies and new regulations around our region in that regard that are making it more complex. So if I come back to the opportunity, and you've got this slide up there. So one of the things, in addition to just the sheer scale of the opportunity and those figures that you can see there, is that the internet has also made trade more inclusive, allowing traditionally marginalised groups such as small businesses, women, rural communities to participate in the global marketplace. Size and physical location need no longer be limiting factors. If you've got mobile technology, if you've got digital technology, if you've got the digital skills to enable you to realise the opportunity that's there. Furthermore, digital tools and technologies greatly reduce trade costs, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. It's not just for big tech or big businesses, but significantly reduce the cost of establishing themselves and exporting for small and medium-sized enterprises, and have accelerated and enabled their ability to participate in international trade. So one of the fantastic figures I've seen is that 97% of internet-enabled small and medium-sized businesses export. That's dramatic in a lifetime where I've been a trade negotiator and a trade promoter, where, you know, between 2 and 28% of small and medium-sized enterprises in most countries are exporting. You know, so it radically transforms the ability of small businesses to export and trade. And that can have an economy-wide impact, given that small and medium-sized enterprises that use digital technologies are not just tech or ICT companies, but companies across industry verticals, including traditional industries such as agriculture, healthcare and manufacturing. So I think that we need to think about digital trade being something that's for everybody, not just for tech companies. And at Google, obviously, we're very interested in actively helping equip individuals and small, medium-sized businesses with the digital skills needed to access this digital economy opportunity and benefit from that. And I'm astounded. I've only been at Google 4 months, but from 2015, Google has provided skills training to 50 million people across APAC to do just that. It's absolutely extraordinary. And I think that we know in partnership with our partners in Indonesia through our Bank-It initiative, which works with local tech firms to nurture talented developers, or the Skills Ignition partnership that we've got in Singapore, for example, offering training and work placements for thousands of people. We're doing just that, providing the digital skills and capacity to realise the opportunity. However, And Thomas, if we can move to the second slide. One of the challenges is the ability of the internet to continue to deliver these extraordinary benefits is becoming more complicated as governments and regulators look at national digital borders or limiting cross-border flow of data which powers that digital trade. And I think that these two links are particularly significant. I can go into those if people want to talk about it. It's just two examples and go into some of the developments in each jurisdiction. But we're seeing a panoply of different policies and regulations that businesses and others and people need to navigate in terms of how they manage data, and that for small businesses is increasingly complicated. I mean, it's one thing for the likes of Google to navigate understanding the rules of the road in domestic jurisdictions and across borders, but it's quite another thing for a small and medium-sized enterprise that was just realising the opportunity to try and get across the compliance obligations that are now in place or coming down the pike. So I wanted to talk a little bit about security and privacy, since we know that that the scale of the opportunity for the internet economy goes hand in hand with also rising concerns and interests in having trust and confidence about privacy of data and the security of data to enable us to really embrace the opportunity of the digital economy. We know that data breaches reached an all-time high last year, and so that concern is genuine. And what can we do to build trust and confidence around the benefits of open data flows? And part of that is the government and international agreement framework and rules of the road, and part of that is the responsibility of companies such as Google to build the products and services that can give people trust and confidence. It's very clear that expectations of companies are changing. If I just start with companies first, people want better product experiences, better security, better privacy protections, and they want all of that to be easy and to fit into their lives without requiring 100 specific toggles or privacy lawyers' credentials to try and navigate. And it's our job, for example, at Google and in other businesses, to meet and exceed those expectations, so that people can realise the opportunities that we're discussing here. At Google, every single product we make is secure by default. And by making important security technology available to others as well, including through our Android systems, we're helping to raise the bar for security everywhere. We encrypt data that moves between your device, Google services, and our data centres to provide the highest level of security and privacy. We've announced $10 billion over the next years to strengthen our cybersecurity, including expanding our zero trust programs, securing our software supply chain, and enhancing open source security provisions to all. We've got custom designed data centres and private undersea cables that transfer data between continents, and we operate one of the world's most secure and reliable cloud infrastructures. But we are guided by four things. I'm very happy to talk about those today. Firstly, keeping information secure by default with advanced industry-leading security technology. And for example, blocking more than 100 million phishing attempts every day and 1 billion passwords for breaches daily. I mean, the scale of the effort required to provide that security is really quite astonishing, and that's what our customers expect. The second principle is treating data responsibly through privacy by design. And so we're getting better and better at that with new approaches to machine learning that enable processing on mobile devices without centralized training data, which means we can get insights that improve product functionality and features, but without personally identifying data. We've built the world's largest open source library of differential privacy algorithms, helping everyone from cancer researchers to census analysts apply privacy preserving technology to their work. The third principle is to build on safeguards that are always in place, and we provide meaningful controls and tools to users so that they're in control of their data as they want to be. We offer auto delete as a default setting on all Google accounts, and we offer portability through our takeout program, which provides data portability for over 70 of our products, including Chrome, Gmail, Drive, and YouTube. And the fourth principle is what Kurt has been talking about, and it's a responsibility of all responsible companies like ours, which is constructive and productive engagement with governments, regulators, civil society, industry colleagues around the world, and our customers to find shared solutions to the problems that we're encountering in moving into a digital age. In relation to the trade rules of the road, which Kurt is much more of an expert on than I am, let me say three things. Firstly, that strong digital rules can help translate core trade principles of openness and non-discrimination into the digital trade sphere, including on data flows. And the CPTPP, as Kurt mentioned, and it's an acronym I always think I'm getting wrong, it's a real mouthful, was the first agreement to set binding rules on cross-border data flows and data localization. One of the things we know about the CPTPP, for example, and I'm sure we'll get to this in the discussion, is that the effectiveness of rules like these is also dependent on a couple of other factors, not just the robustness of the provisions in that agreement themselves, but also the exceptions that parties take to those rules and whether those rules ultimately are enforced. And I think that that's something that we'll come to in the discussion. But in addition to the CPTPP, I'm really glad to see that Ambassador Tong raised the APEC, the cross-border data code, which is getting a lot of interest, including beyond APEC. We've seen the US, Mexico, Canada agreement, which is building on that. And we've seen things like the Australia-Singapore Digital Agreement, which really provides quite robust provisions around data flows and data protection. So that's important in terms of strong digital rules. But we also need to see interoperability between jurisdictions. What we don't want to see, if we want to realise this extraordinary opportunity, is digital fragmentation because of rules domestically and internationally that govern data, because it's just so difficult for businesses and people to navigate. And in a digitally fragmented world, or where there's a panoply of data localization laws, we know that small and medium-sized businesses will be hit the hardest, and I'm happy to come back to that. Firstly, there's also, and I'm glad, Thomas, you raised this, I mean, the figures that I've been talking about is what we estimate based on what we already know. But one of the things we know is that we can't predict how the world will change and what new businesses and opportunities might be out there. And we know that enabling cross-border data flows and enabling large data sets provides people with the ability to innovate at scale and to do so more accurately around things like global challenges such as fighting disease or thinking about transport and trade infrastructure and measuring that and thinking about how to do that effectively. And when we're thinking about emerging technologies like AI and machine learning, open, diverse data sets, which are global in scope, will provide a better representation and provide better input to better answers to the sorts of questions that we want responsible AI to answer. So I might leave us with those in initial thoughts, and happy to come back to the discussion.
Thanks, Michaela. Very good summary and covering how much needs to be done and how complicated it is. I do agree that you know, the need for open data flows is obvious, and I think it's really that, you know, people don't know you know, which bandwagon to get on, so to speak, to make it happen the way that, you know, that protects the individual and while also leaves open the opportunity to take advantage of all the innovation. So thanks for that. And we have one question. I also want to urge folks, if anybody else, to ask a question in the Q&A box. I'll go ahead to Catherine, who's asking, what impact will China's recent digital trade laws have on businesses outside of China, as it seems that there's some extraterritorial component of that? Who wants to go first on that one?
I wish that the question was a bit more specific about which rules the questioners is concerned about.
I think it's the privacy one. That I think that was the one that was more recently announced, right? That indicated. I thought it had the extraterritorial. So, but
Yeah,
I'm not an expert on this myself.
well, I think I've heard about that there's Chinese regulation that in the United States, what we've mostly seen is rules which have constrained the ability of Chinese digital platform companies to operate outside China, including the United States. I guess for that privacy concern reason, that there's concern that the data of Chinese citizens might be somehow made subject to foreign regulation or foreign ownership. And that's been seen in the reluctance of Chinese authorities to allow those companies to raise capital in the U.S. markets or elsewhere. But is that the concern? And maybe, well, if the person clarifies that, Michaela, if you know more about this, you could chime in.
Yeah, Catherine.
Well, thank you. Well, I think, as I said earlier, we remain concerned about a number of developments, and I showed that second slide on the acceleration of the number of policies, regulations, and restrictions on data flows, and the fact that there's just so many across the region, and they're different, and so that interoperability and the ability to find clear rules of the road is more challenging. And things that we're concerned about is restricting data flows, compelling access to information on our users, measures driven by economic protectionism that risk fracturing the global digital economy. We think some of those really do limit the opportunity that we could also see in relation to that digital trade opportunity, which we talked about at the outset. And one of the things Google, like so many global businesses, has a globally distributed infrastructure designed to ensure that consumers in Nha Trang have got the same experience as consumers in London. And that's the same internet experience in terms of privacy, security protections, and that the products will deliver that same value to users. And we see that that's what the users of our products want. So it's very challenging in a region where we're seeing a proliferation of different rules and regulations, and also where there's a lack of precision about what those rules and regulations might mean for businesses to then navigate how they navigate those, how they comply with those and deliver the products and services that consumers are asking for to realise that growth opportunity and that innovation opportunity that they're after.
Great. We have another question. So the need to store, this is Catherine with, clarifying, the need to store customer data onshore in China would seem designed to force global businesses to have data center presence in China.
Yeah, well, that makes that's I don't think that's necessarily a new thing. I mean, the law's been strengthened recently, and the question has always been enforcement. Even earlier than that, China instituted a lot of provisions requiring that companies generating data on Chinese citizens as customers would need to provide access to code, underlying code, and access to that data on request by the companies that are creating that data, even if it's just people's shoe size. The Chinese government, it's not unique, but it's sort of very much on the end of the spectrum that wants to have the government to have unfettered access to whatever information might be available that might either currently or in the future prove of use to government as it defines its responsibilities. And that can really create real concerns about the maintenance of data privacy when the perspective is essentially different, right? The Chinese government says the data privacy is important for citizens, except when the government wants the data. They agree with the idea that individual Chinese citizens should not be able to access other Chinese citizens' data in an improper fashion, or that Chinese corporations should not be able to do so. And they kind of get the idea that data should be protected from corporations, but there's no sense of protection from government reach. And that's one of the real impediments to China being able to participate in any international agreements on this, because that understanding is quite different from other governments, where government has to demonstrate a need for the data, either in the courts or through law or through public debate, rather than assuming that it will have access. So yes, that's a big impediment, major impediment to foreign companies of all kinds working in not just digital businesses per se, but many companies in their operations in China find that to be a very difficult set of regulatory restrictions to work with.
Great, thanks. We have a third question. Thank you. Asking if do you, I'm assuming that's Google, offer educational exchange programs or cooperation or educational agreements in the digital economy with universities in Southeast Asia?
Oh, thank you for the question. And we do. We've got a number of programs and collaboration partners. We work with the Asia Foundation, for example, on digital skilling. We offer a lot of training and certification, including through our own online products and services. So there's a lot of certification programs that people go through. And I mentioned that 50 million users trained in digital skills by Google since 2015, which is extraordinary. We also offer scholarship. We've got a women founders program, so we provide support to certain different groups. One example is for startups founded by women in particular, and the support for them to learn how to grow that business and scale that business. And we've also got, as I mentioned, the Ignition Skills program, for example, with the Singapore government. So there's so much information I can provide on that, and I'm happy to follow up if you give me your details. Great.
Thanks, Michaela. I would like to ask, you mentioned startups, and this is close to my heart. I started a startup myself, and I started my career in Silicon Valley, and that's where you really see the nature of these digital solutions. And it's not just the tech giants, but if you're a startup company, there are so many digital platforms that you need to run your company effectively. That's why you can have these one-person startup companies that can go global, as Michaela mentioned, these SME startups that are, 97% exporting, but they generally rely on tool sets that are global. If you have an accounting tool, you have a way of tracking your customers on a CRM package, and these tools are not typically localized into one country. And customer data, governments need to regulate that. But if you say a startup company has to have all of the data that runs everything in their company locally hosted, it might be a bridge too far. And it's hard for governments to even sort through this. And I think maybe the thing is that most citizens in Asia have seen the consumer end of the internet and haven't yet seen the employee side of it, or the business side, where their career is in the digital realm. And once they start to get there, as you get more and more people who are having digital jobs and digital, employment, they might look at this in a little more balanced way. Because I think on the consumer side, there was this, wave of adoption where you have email and you have video on demand and you have all this great stuff. And now some of the backlash is happening that they're noticing it's controlled by some tech giants, and there's some inequality problems that have been created by it. But I think that my question is, do you think that it'll kind of come back around as more and more people become employed in the digital economy and they see that their livelihoods are dependent on it, and they can see more of a balance? Because, obviously the problems need to be solved. There's no one way to solve it.
If I can respond, Thomas, it's a really important question. A couple of things. Certainly, digital skilling and digital literacy are critical. They're critical for the digital age, and certainly a priority for Google is to really lean in and contribute to that digital skilling and digital literacy in a variety of different ways, because it's just so important, even if, beyond trade, just for accessing government services and all the other things that you're going to increasingly need digital literacy for. One of the things that was attracting me to join Google was the fact that it's got this commitment to being very open about that digital capability and digital platform. So you look at Android and the fact that you can access that Android capability, and that's open for people to access that. And then YouTube, somebody earlier asked about education. You just think about how many people turn to YouTube every day to learn how to do something, including online, in multiples of different languages, and how extraordinarily important that is for people, so that you're providing that open access for people to learn what they want, when they want, in the language that they want as well. And I think that that's one of the remarkable things that digital platforms can provide to people. But certainly, coming back to that question about data localization, it can be challenging. And one of the issues is, of course, there's a growing understanding about the need for cybersecurity and privacy. And I talked about the growing threats and issues, and Google does a lot, including to publicize threats and challenges, and the security we offer by design, including through our TAG, our threat assessment group, providing information about really concerning threats, so that people are aware of those, and double authentication and all these sorts of things that actually Google initiated to help people protect their cybersecurity. But if we just think about cloud services, for example, or data localization and what that might mean, sometimes it might mean actually challenges to security, because in the event of a major disruption, platform services, if you're in an open cloud network, can be moved instantly from one facility to another, so that they can continue to provide users with access to their information, and that information is secure by design. So the capacity to provide that technological solution for that sort of event might in fact be hampered by a data localization provision. And so it's really important for us to work very closely with governments and industry and our customers and users to talk about how to manage data and how to provide people with trust and confidence. So I think that this is, we're in a really important period where one of the things we need to do is really work together to work through these problems in ways that achieve the optimal outcome in terms of realizing the opportunity, and identifying and managing the risks in ways that don't hamper innovation or prevent us realizing some of that potential which actually we need, particularly as we're coming out of a pandemic and with the other challenges that we face.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that with respect to the coronavirus pandemic, you don't hear people talking about supply chain disruptions or inflation in digital businesses, right? And there's a reason for that, because there haven't been supply chain disruptions or inflation, because there's reliability of supply for precisely the reasons that Michaela was identifying. And that reliability of supply is enhanced by government not blocking the ability to move data seamlessly. So there's, the incentives to come up with a system that is globally integrated in information management and in the digital economy far outweigh the risks, but the risks do have to be managed. And so I think what the exercise for governments should be defined as risk mitigation, rather than trying to invent a whole new system for a digital economy, which is actually thriving extraordinarily well and outperforming other aspects of everyone's economy in a more resilient fashion, as exhibited by the pandemic.
Thanks, Ambassador. It reminds me of the story of General Motors during the U.S. Depression, where 25% of the workforce is out of work, but the company was growing like crazy because they were in a business that was basically the future. And in digital, I think that's people have they have only seen a small part of what's to come, and aren't necessarily aware of all the complexities, and everybody's right to want better security and privacy, and that also needs to come. It's just how to put it all in a package that can be done consistently and effectively. So we have one last question. This is Catherine again, and she's asking about what's being done to develop a policy for responsible AI.
I'll tell you what I know, which is not much. Both what I know and what's actually happening, or what I think is happening. There is conversation among a number of like-minded governments. There's a channel between the US and Japan, for example, to have conversations about the future of AI and how to do it. But the government is way behind academia and the private sector in understanding the substance of the matter. And many governments are promoting it as an important future industry, but there is insufficient understanding of it, and then insufficient thought about how to properly mitigate risks that are associated with it. Because there are significant risks. I mean, there's the big risk, the Terminator risk, that the computers take over the world and get rid of us human beings. That may happen a few hundred years from now, I'm not sure. In the more near term, the question of improper utilization of people's personal data, for example, on AI related platforms, is something that's significant, needs to be considered. But at the end of the day, it's the same issue. It's not like the privacy is the same privacy issue. It's the same question about responsible utilization of data, and people-friendly design of systems. I think governments have a lot of catch up to do on this. One of the things that I was happy to see in both that chart I showed, the DEPA, the US-Japan agreement, I think it's in Australia, Singapore, is recognition of this as an emerging issue set that needs to be considered carefully.
Great. We were almost out of time, Michaela.
Look, really fantastic question, and there's a lot to say and not much time, but we know that AI has significant potential to help solve the most challenging problems that we have, including by advancing medicine, understanding language, and fueling scientific discovery. But to do that, we want it to develop responsibly. And so Google has established a number of principles that guide Google's AI application and best practices that we share with others, and we work with communities outside of Google to inform those principles and our ethical model for engaging on AI. So, I mean, this is a particularly new area for me, but let me tell you, Google's AI practices. Key principle is fairness, aiming to avoid unfair bias in our AI models and products through innovations in data, model constraints in our recommendation engine and testing. Then explainability and accountability, ensuring that there's an ability to understand how machine learning models work and the data that they're trained on, and explain decisions and predictions made by machine learning, and ensuring state-of-the-art privacy protections in machine learning models, and security, building safety and security into our machine learning systems. And this is still it's a huge area of research and work. But we've got our principles, which I'm happy to share with people on our, I'll share a link with Hinrich after this session, which sets out the principles of what we will do and what we won't do in AI. We've got the GNI principles that we've committed to, and we're certainly engaging with governments in this part of the world and beyond APAC in terms of understanding together, you know, what are the sorts of rules of the road we want for AI. And in fact, this is a really significant area of work. And I think Google, through doing things like not having broad spread facial recognition technology, for one thing, is in part a decision guided by the ethical framework that we use to think about AI.
Great. Thanks, Michaela and Ambassador. I just have to also mention there are areas of AI where these issues are much less of a concern, like the work Google's doing in genetics and protein folding, which is just tremendous. It's a tremendous advance, and it's going to create
autonomous vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Which is an enormous potential growth industry. I mean,
Right.
Google
We don't
and
wanna...
others, Alphabet and others are really in the lead on that. I appreciate that AI is why a lot of the phishing attempts get filtered out. For example, you know, you said was 100 million phishing attempts that are taken down each day. I don't know, those I get about 100 million a day, so I'm not sure who else is getting them. But I appreciate you cleaning up and keeping it down to a dull roar. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, we are over, so I will go ahead and close the session. We have, okay, the thanks for the Hinrich Foundation for hosting, and the URL there is where you can register to receive a notification when the recording is available. And also thanks for all the participants, and thanks for Michaela and Ambassador Tong for your great insights. And then everybody else have a wonderful day, and we look forward to the next event, and reach out if you have any questions.